The text notification chimed just as Catherine Wells finished watering her orchids. She ignored it at first, probably another promotional message from the grocery store. Lately, that's all her phone seemed good for. Her son hadn't called in 8 months. With soil-stained fingers, she finally reached for her phone. The message made her porcelain watering can slip from her grip, shattering against the hardwood floor. "Mom, I need you. Please come." 5 simple words from Ethan. Her son. Her only child who had effectively written her out of his life shortly after marrying Vanessa. Water pooled around the broken shards as Katherine stared at the screen, heart hammering against her ribs. No explanations. No apologies for the cold silence. Just desperation clinging to each word like morning dew on a spider's web. She called him immediately. No answer. Tried again. Straight to voicemail. Katherine grabbed her purse and car keys, leaving the mess of broken porcelain and spilled water for later. Her son needed her. Nothing else mattered. The drive to Ethan's house took 45 minutes, though it felt like hours. Her mind raced through possibilities. Was he hurt? Sick? Had something happened to one of the twins? The grandchildren she'd only seen in Facebook photos posted by distant relatives who still spoke to her. As she pulled into the driveway of the colonial-style home she'd never been invited to, Katherine noticed Ethan's car parked haphazardly, one wheel on the neatly manicured lawn. Her stomach tightened. Ethan was meticulous about everything, especially his prized lawn. The front door stood slightly ajar. She called his name as she entered, the unfamiliar layout of her son's home feeling like a metaphor for how foreign he'd become to her. "Ethan?" She found him in the kitchen, sitting at a granite island, head in his hands. The space around him was in disarray, papers strewn across countertops, drawers pulled open, cabinet doors ajar. Not the pristine home she'd imagined from the photos she'd seen. "Ethan, what's happened?" When he looked up, Katherine barely recognized him. Gone was the confident, successful financial advisor she'd raised. In his place sat a hollow-eyed stranger, unshaven and unkempt. "She's gone." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Vanessa's gone. And so is everything else." Katherine moved cautiously toward him, unsure if he would reject her comfort after all this time. "What do you mean, gone?" He gestured weakly at the papers scattered across the counter. "Empty accounts. Forged signatures. Vanessa cleaned me out, Mom. 3 years of marriage, and she was planning this the whole time." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "The twins are at school. I don't know how to tell them their mother isn't coming back." Katherine's hand hovered over her son's shoulder, afraid to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. When he didn't pull away from her touch, she felt a fragment of the ice between them begin to thaw. "Start from the beginning," she said gently. "Tell me everything." As Ethan spoke, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Vanessa had methodically isolated him from his mother, his friends, anyone who might have noticed the red flags. She'd gradually taken control of their finances, convincing him to add her name to his accounts for simplicity. And then yesterday, while Ethan was at work and the twins at school, she'd withdrawn everything and disappeared. "The house is mortgaged to the hilt," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't even know. She forged my signature. The investment accounts are empty. My client's money," he broke off, unable to continue. Katherine felt her blood run cold. "Your client's money?" Ethan nodded, shame washing over his features. "She somehow accessed it. I'm going to prison, Mom." I'm going to lose everything, my license, my freedom, the twins. For a moment, Katherine felt the weight of vindication. Hadn't she warned him about Vanessa's controlling behavior when they first met? Hadn't she sensed something off about the woman who would become her daughter-in-law? But that feeling quickly gave way to maternal determination. Her son needed her now. The recriminations and "I told you so's" could wait. "We're going to fix this," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "First, we need a lawyer. Then we need to report this to the police." She paused, steeling herself for his reaction. "And I'm here for the twins. For as long as you need me." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes swimming with tears and regret. "After the way I've treated you, how can you just—" "Because I'm your mother," Katherine said simply. "That's never changed, even when you shut me out." As they sat in the chaos of Ethan's kitchen, the beginning of a plan forming between them, Katherine realized that the road ahead would be long and painful. Her son had been betrayed in the worst possible way. But in that betrayal, perhaps they'd found a path back to each other. Outside, she heard the rumble of a school bus. The twins would be home soon, 2 6-year-olds who would want to know where their mother was. Katherine squared her shoulders. Her family needed her. And this time, she wouldn't be pushed away. "Grandma Kay." Sophie's small arms wrapped around Katherine's waist with surprising strength, while her brother Adam hung back, regarding the grandmother he barely remembered with cautious eyes. Katherine knelt down to Sophie's level, drinking in the sight of her granddaughter's face, Ethan's eyes, but thankfully little of Vanessa in her features. "Look how big you've gotten," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you so much." "Did you bring us presents?" Sophie asked, ever the practical child. Katherine laughed despite the gravity of the situation. "Not today, sweetheart. But I'll make it up to you, I promise." Adam approached slowly, studying her with solemn eyes. "Are you staying with us now?" The simple question held layers of complexity. Katherine looked up at Ethan, who gave a slight nod. "Yes," she told her grandson. "I'm going to stay for a while." "Because Mommy went on a trip?" Adam asked, his gaze darting between the adults. The tension in the room thickened. Katherine watched her son struggle with what to tell his children. The truth was too complicated, too painful for their young minds to comprehend. "Yes," Ethan finally said. "Mommy had to go away for a while." "When is she coming back?" Sophie demanded, her lower lip beginning to tremble. Katherine saw Ethan's resolve crumbling and stepped in. "Why don't we make some macaroni and cheese for dinner? It used to be your daddy's favorite when he was your age." The distraction worked, temporarily diverting the twins from questions neither adult was prepared to answer. As Katherine busied herself in the kitchen, finding her way around the unfamiliar space, Ethan retreated to his office to make calls. Later, with the twins finally asleep in their beds, Katherine and Ethan sat at the kitchen table with coffee cups and a legal pad between them. The lawyer Ethan had contacted would meet them in the morning. The police report had been filed. Now they faced the impossible task of damage control. "How much did she take?" Katherine asked quietly. Ethan's hand shook as he lifted his coffee cup. "All of it. Our savings, retirement accounts, the equity from the house. And about $2.3 million from client accounts." Katherine's breath caught. "How did she access your client's money?" "I kept backup files on my home computer," he admitted, shame coloring his features. "Password protected, but she must have figured it out. She had months to plan this while I was at work, with the kids at school." He buried his face in his hands. "I was so stupid, Mom. So blind. Katherine reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Ethan, look at me. When he met her gaze, she continued. You were manipulated by someone you trusted. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. The SEC is going to investigate, he said hollowly. Even if they believe I wasn't involved, I was negligent. Criminally negligent. I'll lose my license at minimum. Possibly face charges. Then we fight, Katherine said firmly. We find Vanessa. We get the money back. Ethan shook his head. She's gone, Mom. Probably out of the country by now. People leave trails, Katherine insisted. Digital footprints. She has to have made mistakes. For the first time since she'd arrived, a flicker of hope crossed Ethan's face. She did seem in a hurry at the end. Started acting strange about 2 weeks ago. Katherine leaned forward. Strange how? More secretive than usual. Jumpy. She changed the password on her phone. His brow furrowed. And she was talking to someone on the phone in the garage late at night. I thought she was having an affair. I almost confronted her about it, but then. She left before you could, Katherine finished. Ethan, this is good. If she was rushing, she made mistakes. We just need to find them. For the next few hours, they pieced together Vanessa's final days in the house. Her furtive phone calls. The packages she received and quickly hid. The sudden girls' weekend 3 weeks ago that Ethan now realized might have been a dry run or preparation. As they worked, Katherine felt a bitter irony in the situation. For 3 years, she'd been shut out of her son's life because Vanessa had convinced Ethan that his mother was controlling and manipulative. Now Vanessa had revealed herself to be everything she'd accused Katherine of being, and worse. We should try to get some sleep, Katherine finally said, noticing Ethan's exhausted eyes. The lawyer will be here at 9. As she turned to head to the guest room, Ethan called after her. Mom? She paused. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. For everything. For shutting you out. For believing her lies about you. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. We'll talk about that later. For now, let's focus on fixing this. Later, lying in the unfamiliar guest bed, Katherine stared at the ceiling and allowed herself to feel the full range of emotions she'd been suppressing for her son's sake. Anger at Vanessa for the devastation she'd caused. Relief that the toxic woman was out of their lives. Grief for the years lost with her son and grandchildren. And beneath it all, a steely determination. Vanessa had taken almost everything from Ethan. But Katherine wouldn't let her take his future or his children. Of that, she was certain. The meeting with Lawrence Geller, the attorney Ethan had retained, did not go well. The situation is grave, Geller said, his expression somber as he arranged papers on Ethan's dining room table. The SEC will investigate. The clients whose funds were stolen will likely file civil suits. And while I believe we can make a compelling case that you were a victim, Mr. Wells, the fact remains that you were negligent in safeguarding client information. Katherine watched her son's face grow paler with each word. She'd sent the twins outside to play, not wanting them to witness their father's distress. What about finding Vanessa? She interjected. Recovering the stolen funds? Geller adjusted his glasses. The police will certainly investigate, but frankly, Mrs. Wells. Ms. Wells, Katherine corrected. She'd kept her maiden name after her husband died 20 years ago. Apologies. Ms. Wells, in these situations, recovery is rare. Your daughter-in-law appears to have planned this meticulously. She's not my daughter-in-law, Katherine said sharply. And I refuse to accept that she can simply disappear with millions of dollars without a trace. Geller exchanged a glance with Ethan. Your mother's determination is admirable, but we need to be realistic. Our primary focus should be mitigating the damage to your career and keeping you out of prison. The word prison hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Katherine saw Ethan's hands begin to shake. I think we need a moment, she told the lawyer firmly. After Geller stepped outside to take a phone call, Katherine turned to her son. Listen to me, Ethan. That man is preparing for you to lose. I'm not. Mom. No, hear me out. Remember when you were 17 and wrapped my car around that oak tree on Maple Drive? Everyone said the car was totaled. Your father wanted to just collect the insurance. But I found that mechanic in Riverdale who restored vintage cars, and we got it fixed. A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips. Dad was so mad. Because he'd given up too easily. Katherine leaned forward. I'm not giving up on this. On you. We're going to find Vanessa, and we're going to get back what she stole. Ethan shook his head. How? The police said. The police have hundreds of cases. They can't give this the attention it deserves. Katherine's mind was racing. But I know someone who might be able to help. My friend Diane's son, Marcus. He's some kind of computer security expert. A hacker? Ethan looked skeptical. He prefers digital forensic specialist, Katherine said with a small smile. But yes. If anyone can find digital breadcrumbs, it's him. For the first time, a spark of genuine hope flickered in Ethan's eyes. You really think we can find her? I think we have to try, Katherine said firmly. For the twins if nothing else. When Geller returned, they shifted the conversation to immediate practical concerns, freezing remaining accounts, notifying clients, preparing a statement for the regulatory bodies. Through it all, Katherine watched her son straighten his shoulders, finding a reserve of strength she'd always known was there. Later that afternoon, while Ethan met with his business partner to explain the catastrophe, Katherine made a phone call. Diane? It's Katherine. I need a favor. 2 days later, Marcus Chin sat at Ethan's dining room table, his fingers flying over laptop keys with hypnotic speed. The 30-something security consultant had arrived with multiple computers and devices Katherine couldn't identify. Your daughter-in-law was good, Marcus commented without looking up. But not as good as she thought. You found something? Katherine leaned forward, trying to make sense of the screens. Marcus nodded. Several somethings. For starters, she didn't use a sophisticated enough VPN when accessing the bank accounts. I can see she logged in from an IP address in Toronto 3 days ago. Katherine's heart raced. She's in Canada? Was in Canada, Marcus corrected. Likely just passing through. But here's where it gets interesting. He pulled up what looked like a series of email receipts. She booked a hotel in Mexico City under her maiden name, Vanessa Ricci. Paid with a prepaid card, but used her regular email address. So she's in Mexico? Ethan asked, having just walked in from putting the twins to bed. Marcus shrugged. Maybe. But I'm finding evidence she was researching properties in Costa Rica for months before she left. My guess? She's headed there. It's harder to extradite from Costa Rica, and their banking privacy laws are favorable for someone looking to hide money. Katherine and Ethan exchanged glances. This is more than the police found, Ethan said quietly. Because I'm not constrained by the same legal limitations, Marcus replied, then quickly added, everything I'm doing is legal adjacent. Just creative. For the next hour, they watched as Marcus pieced together Vanessa's digital trail. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had been planning her escape for nearly a year, gradually liquidating assets, researching locations, creating false identities. But in her final rush, she'd grown careless. She created an account on a Costa Rican real estate website, Marcus said. Used a burner email, but the same password she uses for everything else. Rookie mistake. How would you know her passwords? Ethan asked. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Let's just say there have been enough data breaches that most people's password habits are documented somewhere online. Your wife uses variations of Sophie Adam 2016 for almost everything. Not exactly Fort Knox. Katherine felt a chill run down her spine. The names of the twins. Their birth year. Such personal information used so carelessly, it seemed emblematic of how Vanessa had treated her entire family. So what now? Katherine asked. We know she's headed to Costa Rica. Does that help us? Marcus leaned back in his chair. It does if you're willing to pursue her there. The police might eventually get around to working with international authorities, but by then, she'll have established herself with new identities, new accounts. I can't leave the country, Ethan said, running a hand through his hair. The SEC investigation, the twins. Katherine straightened her shoulders. I can. Both men turned to look at her. Mom, no, Ethan said immediately. This isn't your problem to fix. Isn't it? Katherine countered. Those are my grandchildren whose future is at stake. That's my son whose life is being torn apart. And frankly, I've got nothing but time these days. She turned to Marcus. What would I need to do? Marcus looked uncertainly between mother and son. Theoretically, you'd need to track her movements, gather evidence of the fraud, possibly work with local authorities in Costa Rica. It's not simple, and it's definitely not without risk. Mom, Ethan's voice was strained. This is insane. You can't just fly to Central America and hunt down Vanessa. Why not? Katherine asked. I speak Spanish. I've traveled plenty. And I'm the last person she'd expect to come after her. Because she's dangerous. Ethan exploded. She stole millions of dollars. Who knows what else she's capable of? And I can't, his voice broke. I can't lose you too. Not when I just got you back. The raw emotion in his voice hit Katherine like a physical blow. She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. You won't lose me, she promised. But we need to act quickly. Each day that passes, the trail gets colder. Marcus cleared his throat. There is another option. I have contacts in Costa Rica. People who specialize in finding people who don't want to be found. Private investigators? Katherine asked. Marcus shrugged. Of a sort. Less formal, more effective. Ethan looked skeptical. That sounds questionable at best, illegal at worst. What's illegal is what Vanessa did to you, Katherine said firmly. If Marcus's contacts can find her and the money, I think we should consider it. The three of them talked late into the night, weighing options, risks, potential outcomes. By the time Marcus packed up his equipment, they had the outline of a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't without danger, but it offered something precious, hope. After Marcus left, Katherine found Ethan standing in the doorway of the twins' bedroom, watching them sleep. They look so peaceful, he whispered as she joined him. They have no idea their entire world is falling apart. It's not falling apart, Katherine corrected gently. It's changing. There's a difference. Ethan turned to her, his eyes haunted. What if we can't fix this? What if the money's gone, and I go to prison? What happens to them then? Then they'll stay with me, Katherine said without hesitation. And we'll visit you every week. And when you get out, we'll rebuild. She squeezed his arm. But that's the worst-case scenario. I believe we can do better. As they turned to leave the sleeping children, Ethan spoke quietly. Why are you doing all this? After how I treated you, cutting you out of our lives. Katherine's heart ached at the memory of those lonely years, the birthdays and holidays spent alone, the invitations declined or never extended. Because that's what family does, she said simply. We show up when it matters most. 3 days later, Katherine found herself in a small cafe in San Jose, Costa Rica, nursing a cup of strong coffee and trying to calm her nerves. Marcus's contact, a sun-weathered American expat who had introduced himself only as Jack, sat across from her, reviewing the file she'd brought. Your daughter-in-law chose well, Jack commented, studying a photo of Vanessa. Costa Rica has become a haven for people with money to hide. Beautiful country, complex banking system, and authorities who don't ask too many questions if you grease the right palms. Can you find her? Katherine asked directly. Jack smiled, revealing a gold tooth. I already have. Your tech guy's information was good. She purchased a villa under her maiden name in Playa Hermosa, about 2 hours from here. Moved in 4 days ago. Katherine's heart raced. She's there now? Far as I know. I've had someone watching the place since yesterday. Jack leaned forward. But finding her was the easy part. What exactly is your plan, Mrs. Wells? Ms. Wells, she corrected automatically. And my plan is to recover what she stole from my son. Jack raised an eyebrow. Just like that? You're going to knock on her door and ask for $2.3 million back? Katherine's confidence wavered slightly. When put like that, it did sound absurd. I'm open to suggestions. Jack studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. I think I see why your son hired me. You've got guts, but guts only get you so far in this situation. What are you suggesting? A more nuanced approach. Jack pulled out a small notebook. Here's what we know. Vanessa entered the country on a tourist visa using her maiden name. She purchased the villa through a local attorney who specializes in helping foreigners bypass the usual regulations. She's made multiple visits to Banco Nacional but hasn't established a permanent account yet. She's nervous. Watching her back. You've been thorough, Katherine observed. I'm expensive for a reason. Jack snapped the notebook shut. Vanessa thinks she's in the clear, but she's made a critical mistake. What's that? She's still using her own identity. Jack smiled thinly. In her rush, she didn't create a completely new person. Just reverted to her maiden name. That makes her vulnerable, both legally and personally. Over the next hour, Jack outlined a strategy that made Katherine's head spin with its complexity and audacity. It wasn't exactly legal, but it wasn't entirely illegal either, operating in the gray areas where desperation met determination. It could work, she conceded when he finished. But there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of things that could go wrong. That's why you hired professionals, Jack replied. My team will handle the technical aspects. You just need to play your part. And what part is that? The grieving mother-in-law, Jack said simply. The devastated family member who wants to understand why. That won't be hard to play, Katherine said dryly. It's exactly what I am. Jack nodded. The most convincing covers are the ones closest to the truth. We'll move tomorrow. Get some rest, Ms. Wells. You're going to need it. Back in her hotel room, Katherine called Ethan. The connection was staticky, but she could hear the strain in his voice. The SEC investigators were here all day, he told her. They took my computers, files, everything. What did your lawyer say? That cooperation is my best strategy. That they seem to believe I wasn't actively involved. He paused. The twins keep asking when Mommy's coming home. I don't know what to tell them. Katherine's resolve hardened. Tell them the truth, that Mommy made bad choices and had to go away. But that they are loved and safe. Any progress there? Ethan asked, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. We found her, Katherine said simply. Tomorrow, we make our move. There was a long silence on the line. Be careful, Mom. Please. I always am. She tried to sound more confident than she felt. I'll call you tomorrow, after. As she hung up, Katherine moved to the window, gazing out at the lush Costa Rican landscape. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was living in luxury while her children cried for their mother and her husband faced financial and professional ruin. The injustice of it burned in Katherine's chest. She had never considered herself a vengeful person, but in that moment, she understood the primal desire for retribution. It wasn't just about recovering the money anymore. It was about making Vanessa face the consequences of her actions. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The villa sat perched on a hillside overlooking the Pacific, its white stucco walls gleaming in the morning sun. Katherine stood at the locked gate, her heart pounding. Jack's team had confirmed Vanessa was inside, alone. The intercom buzzed when Katherine pressed the button. After a moment, Vanessa's voice, smooth as honey and just as artificial, came through the speaker. Yes? Who is it? Hello, Vanessa. It's Katherine. Ethan's mother. Silence. Then, I don't know what you're talking about. You have the wrong house. I don't think so. Katherine's voice was steady despite her racing pulse. We need to talk, Vanessa. About the money you stole. About the children you abandoned. More silence. Katherine could almost feel Vanessa's panic through the intercom. Finally, go away, or I'm calling the police. Go ahead, Katherine replied. I'm sure the Costa Rican authorities would be very interested to learn about your recent activities. The fraud. The embezzlement. The international flight to avoid prosecution. The gate buzzed open. Katherine walked up the curved driveway, rehearsing what Jack had instructed her to say. They needed Vanessa to admit to the theft, preferably on the recording device concealed in Katherine's purse. They needed evidence of where the money was being held. And most importantly, they needed Vanessa off balance. The front door opened as Katherine approached. Vanessa stood in the doorway, looking like she'd stepped out of a resort catalog in a flowing white sundress, her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist. Only the tightness around her eyes betrayed her tension. Katherine. Her voice was cool, controlled. This is a surprise. Is it? Did you really think no one would come looking for you? Vanessa gestured for Katherine to enter. The interior of the villa was as luxurious as the exterior suggested, open concept, designer furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the ocean view. All bought with stolen money. How did you find me? Vanessa asked, closing the door. Does it matter? Katherine moved further into the living room, taking in details. No personal touches. No photos. A lifestyle curated for quick abandonment if necessary. What matters is why I'm here. To bring me back? Vanessa laughed, the sound brittle. Good luck with that. Costa Rica doesn't extradite for financial crimes. I'm not here to bring you back, Katherine said, turning to face her. I'm here to understand. Why, Vanessa? You had everything, a beautiful home, a successful husband, 2 perfect children who adored you. Why throw it all away? Something flickered across Vanessa's face, regret? Doubt? But it was quickly replaced by the cool mask once more. You wouldn't understand. She moved to a sideboard, pouring herself a glass of water. Not offering one to Katherine. It was never real. Any of it. What wasn't real? Your marriage? Your children? My life. Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. Playing suburban mom, cooking dinner, attending PTA meetings. It was suffocating me. I needed more. More than your family? More than your children? Vanessa's eyes hardened. The twins will be fine. Ethan is a good father. And what about the money? Katherine pressed. My son's client's money? Was that just a bonus? A small smile played at the corners of Vanessa's mouth. A necessary cushion for my new life. Ethan made it almost too easy, keeping all those records at home. Just sitting there, waiting. Katherine felt a surge of triumph. There it was, the admission Jack needed. Now for the location of the funds. Where is it? She asked. The money. Surely you haven't spent $2.3 million in a week. Vanessa laughed again, more relaxed now. Perhaps enjoying the chance to gloat about her clever scheme. Of course not. It's safe. Converted and distributed where no one will ever find it. Converted to what? Katherine asked. Cryptocurrency? Among other things. Vanessa moved toward the glass doors leading to the terrace. You've wasted your trip, Katherine. The money is gone. Ethan will go to prison. And I'll be here, enjoying my freedom. Katherine felt a cold rage building inside her. This woman, this sociopath, had destroyed her son's life without a second thought. Had abandoned her children as casually as one might discard a worn-out garment. What about Sophie and Adam? Katherine asked, her voice tight with controlled fury. Don't you miss them at all? For the first time, Vanessa's mask slipped completely. Pain flickered across her features. Of course I miss them. But children adapt. They'll forget me eventually. Like you forgot your own mother? Katherine prodded, remembering what Ethan had once mentioned about Vanessa's childhood. The one who abandoned you when you were 8? Vanessa's head snapped up, eyes flashing. That was different. She was an addict. Weak. I'm giving my children a gift, freedom from having to witness their parents' loveless marriage crumble slowly over years. You're rationalizing, Katherine said quietly. The truth is, you're exactly like her. Running away when things get difficult. Putting yourself first. You know nothing about me. Vanessa's voice turned to ice. Now get out before I call security. There is no security, Vanessa. Just us. Katherine stepped closer. But I'll leave. I've seen and heard everything I needed to. Katherine turned toward the door, her hand clutching her purse containing the recording device. She'd done her part. Now it was up to Jack and his team. "Katherine," Vanessa called after her. She paused, turning back. "Tell Ethan." Vanessa faltered. "Tell him I did love him. Once." "Save your confessions," Katherine replied coldly. "You'll have plenty of time for them when this catches up with you." As Katherine walked back down the driveway, she spotted Jack's unmarked van parked just outside the gate. She climbed in, her hands shaking now that the confrontation was over. "Did you get it?" she asked. Jack nodded, removing his headphones. "Every word. Plus a trace on her phone when she took that call during your conversation." Katherine hadn't even noticed Vanessa taking a call. "What does that tell us?" "That she's been in contact with a broker in Zurich, specialized in converting assets to untraceable cryptocurrencies." Jack smiled. "But nothing is truly untraceable. Not when you know where to look." "So what now?" "Now, Ms. Wells, we follow the money. And we make your daughter-in-law very, very nervous." Over the next 3 days, Katherine watched from a distance as Jack's team implemented their plan. Vanessa's paradise began to unravel thread by thread. Her internet access became sporadically unreliable. Her phone calls dropped mysteriously. The security system at the villa malfunctioned repeatedly, sometimes setting off alarms in the middle of the night. And then came the messages, anonymous notes suggesting that others were looking for her. That others knew what she had done. Psychological warfare, Jack explained when Katherine expressed concern about the ethics of their approach. "We're not harming her. Just making her uncomfortable enough to make mistakes." The pivotal moment came on the 4th day. Katherine was in her hotel room when Jack called. "She's moving the money," he said without preamble. "Trying to consolidate it before running again." "Can we stop her?" Katherine asked, her heart racing. "Better. We can redirect it," Jack replied. "My tech guy has accessed her accounts through a creative method. We can reroute the transfers." "Is that legal?" "Not exactly. But neither was what she did to your son." Jack's voice hardened. "This is your call, Ms. Wells. We can keep watching, gathering evidence that might help the authorities years from now. Or we can act now and get your son's client's money back where it belongs." Katherine closed her eyes, weighing the choice. She'd always been a law-abiding citizen. Had taught Ethan to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. But sometimes, the right thing wasn't the legal thing. "Do it," she said firmly. "Redirect the money back to the victims." Jack's team worked through the night, tracing and redirecting the complex web of transactions Vanessa had created. By dawn, they had recovered nearly $1.9 million of the stolen funds. "It's not everything," Jack told Katherine as they met for coffee one last time. "But it's enough to keep your son out of prison. The remaining amount can be accounted for as her legal share of their joint assets." "What about Vanessa?" Katherine asked. Jack smiled grimly. "After our little digital interruptions and the mysterious messages, she's running scared. Packed up and left the villa this morning. My sources say she's heading for Brazil now, looking over her shoulder every step of the way." "Will she be caught?" "Eventually. People like Vanessa can't help but make the same mistakes. Greed is a pattern that repeats." Jack slid a flash drive across the table. "Evidence of the fraud, her admissions, the money trail. Everything your son's lawyer needs to prove his innocence." 2 days later, Katherine arrived home to find Ethan waiting at the airport, the twins bouncing excitedly beside him. Sophie launched herself into Katherine's arms the moment she appeared. "Grandma Kay. Did you bring us presents from Costa Rica?" Katherine laughed, embracing her granddaughter. "Yes, sweetheart. Presents for both of you." As the children explored their gift bags, Ethan pulled his mother aside. "It worked," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "The SEC is dropping their investigation. The clients whose money was recovered have agreed not to press charges. I may even be able to salvage my practice." Katherine squeezed his hand. "I told you we'd fix this." Later that night, after the twins were asleep, Ethan and Katherine sat on the back porch, the summer twilight wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. "I still can't believe you went to Costa Rica and confronted Vanessa," Ethan said, shaking his head in wonder. "You're the bravest person I know." "Not brave," Katherine corrected. "Just a mother protecting her family." In the silence that followed, the years of estrangement seemed to dissolve between them. Not forgotten, they would need to address those wounds eventually, but overshadowed by the bond that had been rekindled in crisis. "Stay," Ethan said suddenly. "Move in. The twins need you." "I need you." Katherine's heart swelled with a joy she hadn't felt in years. "I'd like that very much." As darkness settled over the yard, fireflies began to dance among the trees, tiny points of light against the gathering shadows. Like hope, Katherine thought. Small but persistent, impossible to extinguish completely. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. The twins would need help processing their mother's abandonment. Ethan's business would take time to rebuild. But they would face it together, as a family. For the first time in 8 long months, Katherine felt truly at home.